"Move along, old man. You can't just stand here all day blocking the way. This area is for event setup." The sharp, impatient voice cut through the cool morning air of Harmony Creek's town square. The words, dripping with youthful arrogance and misplaced authority, were hurled at Arthur Jenkins, a man whose quiet presence seemed to shrink further under the verbal assault. He clutched the worn handle of his equally worn canvas bag, his knuckles white. His faded blue eyes, the color of a winter sky, held a flicker of bewilderment, then a deep, settling sorrow. He hadn't meant to block anything. He was simply standing, as he often did near the granite war memorial, its surface etched with names he knew too well. He was a fixture, a silent sentinel. But today, it seemed his silence was an offense. He looked so frail, so utterly unassuming in his threadbare coat, that the young man in the crisp event staff polo shirt felt no compunction in his brusqueness. This was the moment the fragile piece of Arthur's morning shattered, replaced by a familiar, heavy ache of being unseen, of being dismissed. If you believe our elders, especially those who have served, deserve dignity and respect in their twilight years, comment respect. Arthur Jenkins was a man sculpted by time and hardship. His face a roadmap of a life lived through sun and storm. 79 years had etched their passage onto his skin, yet his posture, though slightly stooped, retained a shadow of military discipline, a core of unyielding steel beneath the veneer of frailty. He lived alone in a small, tidy apartment, on the edge of Harmony Creek, a town that had largely forgotten him, or perhaps had never truly known him. His days were measured by small routines, the early morning walk, a frugal breakfast, and his visits to the town square. The memorial there wasn't just stone to him. It was a testament, a silent conversation with ghosts. He rarely spoke of his past, of the years swallowed by the jungles of a forgotten war, of the things he had seen, the men he had lost, the part of himself that had never truly come home. His current circumstances were modest, bordering on impoverished, yet he carried himself with a quiet dignity that brooked no pity, asked for no special treatment. He was unassuming by nature, blending into the background like the old oak trees that lined the square, steadfast and silent. Today, however, the square was being transformed for the annual Founders' Day celebration. Brightly colored banners were being strung, a temporary stage was being erected, and a buzz of activity filled the air, a stark contrast to Arthur's deliberate stillness. He had hoped to pay his respects before the crowds arrived, before the solemnity of the memorial was drowned out by forced cheer. But it seemed he had lingered too long in the eyes of progress, an inconvenient relic in the path of temporary festivity. The young man, whose name tag read Chad, event coordinator, puffed out his chest. He was barely out of his teens, imbued with the fleeting authority of a brightly colored vest and a clipboard. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to move. We have a schedule to keep." Chad's tone was less a request and more a command, edged with the impatience of youth dealing with what he perceived as obstinate old age. Arthur finally looked up, his gaze meeting Chad's. "I'm not in anyone's way, son," he said, his voice raspy from disuse yet steady. "I'm just remembering." He gestured vaguely toward the memorial. Chad rolled his eyes, a gesture not missed by Arthur, nor by a few early onlookers who were beginning to gather, drawn by the minor confrontation. "Remembering can be done elsewhere, Grandpa. This is prime space. VIPs will be arriving soon. We need it clear." The use of Grandpa was laced with condescension. Arthur's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He didn't raise his voice, didn't argue. He simply stood his ground, his worn boots planted firmly on the cobblestones. This quiet defiance seemed to infuriate Chad more than any outburst would have. "Are you deaf? I said move!" Chad took a step closer, his voice rising in volume, attracting more attention. A woman clutching a designer handbag tutted audibly. "Honestly, some people have no consideration." Her companion, a man in a golf shirt, nodded, probably just looking for a handout. Their whispers, though not directed at Arthur, hung in the air, adding another layer of indignity to the scene. Arthur felt a familiar coldness seep into his bones, the chill of being judged and found, wanting by strangers who knew nothing of the battles he had fought, both overseas and within himself. He simply wanted a few more moments with his silent comrades. Etched in stone, the tension around the war memorial thickened, becoming almost a physical presence. Chad, red-faced and increasingly agitated by Arthur's silent refusal to budge, jabbed a finger toward him. "Look, old man, I'm trying to be nice here, but you're disrupting a major town event. If you don't move right now, I'm calling security, or maybe even the police. Vagrancy, loitering, take your pick." His voice was now loud enough to carry across the square, turning heads, drawing more unwelcome scrutiny upon Arthur. A small crowd had formed a semicircle, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, mild disapproval for the old man's perceived stubbornness, and a touch of pity that didn't quite reach their eyes. Arthur remained stoic, a statue of quiet endurance. His gaze was fixed on the memorial, on a particular name carved near the base. PFC Michael Rohr. A ghost of a smile, infinitely sad, touched his lips. He was there for Michael, and for the others. He had made a promise. 6 minutes, that's how long it felt he'd been standing there under this renewed assault, though it might have been more or less time-warped under the weight of hostile stares. Each tick of an invisible clock seemed to amplify Chad's frustration. "That's it. I'm calling them." Chad fumbled for his phone, his fingers shaking with a mixture of anger and perhaps a sliver of unease at the old man's unwavering, almost unsettling calm. Arthur didn't flinch. He just stood, his frail body a surprising bastion of resolve. He closed his eyes briefly, as if drawing strength from an unseen source. The murmurs of the crowd faded into a dull roar, the angry shouts of the young event coordinator becoming distant thunder. He was in another place, another time, the scent of damp earth and fear sharp in his nostrils, the cries of his comrades echoing in his soul. This small patch of concrete, this public humiliation, was nothing compared to that. The distant wail of a siren began to grow, slicing through the morning chatter and the sounds of event preparation. It was faint at first, then rapidly crescendoed, confirming Chad's threat was either being acted upon or coincidentally timed. A black sedan, followed by 2 police motorcycles, swept around the corner and approached the town square. Chad's face lit up with a vindicated smirk. "See? Told you? Now you're in for it." He clearly assumed this was the authorities responding to his imminent call, or perhaps the early arrival of the town's dignitaries he was so keen to impress. He straightened his polo shirt, ready to present his case of the recalcitrant old man. The lead car, sleek and polished, bearing the town's official crest on its door, pulled to a smooth stop near the edge of the cordoned-off event area. The police outriders dismounted with crisp precision. Arthur remained where he was, his gaze still on the memorial, though a deep weariness now settled in his shoulders. He had hoped for a quiet moment, but it seemed even that small solace was to be denied him. He braced himself for the inevitable, the polite but firm escort away, the final dismissal. He had endured worse. He would endure this. The back door of the sedan opened, and a figure began to emerge, tall, distinguished, in a sharply tailored suit. Mayor Thompson. He was known for his punctuality, and the Founders' Day address was one of the highlights of his civic calendar. Chad practically vibrated with eagerness, stepping forward, ready to intercept the mayor and report Arthur's disruptive behavior. "Mr. Mayor, over here. We have a bit of a situation," Chad began, his voice a little too loud, a little too eager. Mayor Thompson, a man in his late 50s with a commanding presence and eyes that missed little, paused as he straightened his tie. He gave Chad a cursory nod, his attention already scanning the growing crowd and the preparations. His gaze swept past the temporary stage, the banners, the small knot of people near the war memorial. Then it stopped. It fixed on the slender, stooped figure of Arthur Jenkins, standing silently amidst the low-level commotion Chad was trying to orchestrate. The mayor's practiced politician's smile faltered, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. Then something akin to profound recognition. He completely ignored Chad's attempt to gain his ear, his eyes locked on Arthur. Time seemed to slow. The mayor's security detail tensed, unsure of the sudden shift in their principal's demeanor. He took a step, then another, moving with a purpose that silenced the surrounding chatter. He walked directly toward Arthur, his path unwavering, his expression unreadable to most. But to Arthur, who finally turned his head fully, it was a look he hadn't seen directed his way in decades. Chad, utterly bewildered by being so completely overlooked, stammered, "Mr. Mayor, this man." He refuses to... But his words trailed off as the mayor raised a hand, not looking at him, his focus entirely on the old veteran. The crowd watched, captivated, sensing a shift in the unfolding drama. The air crackled with unspoken questions. Who was this old man to draw such focused attention from the mayor himself? Mayor Thompson reached Arthur, his stern, official expression melting away, replaced by something raw and deeply respectful. "Arthur," he said, his voice softer than anyone expected, laced with an emotion that was hard to define. Awe, perhaps, or a resurfacing memory. "Arthur Jenkins. My God, is that really you?" Arthur looked at the mayor, a flicker of recognition in his own weary eyes. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Mayor Thompson," he acknowledged, his voice quiet. Chad, utterly flummoxed, tried again. "Sir, this individual has been causing a disturbance, refusing to cooperate with event staff." The mayor finally turned his gaze to Chad, and it was glacial. "Disturbance, you say, Chad?" His voice was dangerously calm. "This man," he said, gesturing toward Arthur, his voice rising, beginning to resonate with authority and a burgeoning indignation. "This man you've been harassing. Do you have any idea who he is?" Chad paled, stammering. "He's just some old guy, sir. He wouldn't—" The mayor cut him off sharply. "Some old guy?" He let the words hang in the air, heavy with unspoken rebuke. The crowd leaned in, silent, sensing a revelation was imminent. The mayor's eyes, usually warm and politically astute, now blazed with a fire that made Chad shrink. He looked from Chad back to Arthur, his expression softening again when it rested on the veteran, a profound sorrow mixing with the respect. "This old guy," Mayor Thompson began, his voice now ringing across the square, capturing everyone's complete attention, "is Sergeant Arthur Jenkins, United States Army, retired." The mayor's voice, amplified by his righteous anger and a deep, resonant respect, filled the suddenly silent town square. "Sergeant Arthur Jenkins," he repeated, his gaze sweeping over the now shame-faced Chad and the astonished onlookers, "is not just any veteran. This man, who you so casually dismissed and threatened, is a recipient of the Medal of Honor." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The Medal of Honor, the nation's highest award for valor. Chad's face, already pale, turned a sickly green. His jaw hung slack. The woman with the designer handbag brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. The man in the golf shirt looked down at his shoes, a flush creeping up his neck. Mayor Thompson continued, his voice thick with emotion. He earned that medal in the Aha Valley, during an engagement so fierce most of us can't even comprehend it. He single-handedly held off an enemy assault, protecting his wounded comrades, allowing for their evacuation. He dragged 3 men, one of them my own father, Captain David Thompson, to safety under withering fire. After being wounded himself, he refused evacuation until every last man of his platoon was accounted for. The mayor's eyes glistened. My father wouldn't be alive. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for Arthur Jenkins. He is a hero, a living legend of this town, though he would never say so himself. He turned back to Arthur, his expression one of profound gratitude and sorrow for the disrespect shown. "Arthur, I am so deeply sorry for how you've been treated here today. On behalf of this town, I apologize." He then looked pointedly at Chad, whose entire demeanor had crumpled. This young man, and anyone else who judged him by his coat instead of his character, owes him far more than an apology. The weight of the mayor's words settled over Harmony Creek Square like a physical presence. The buzzing activity of the event setup had ceased entirely. Workers stood frozen, banners half-hung, tools idle in their hands. The onlookers, moments before a mixture of indifferent or judgmental, now stared at Arthur Jenkins with a mixture of awe, shame, and dawning respect. Chad looked as though the ground might swallow him. He opened his mouth, but no words came out, just a choked sound. The Medal of Honor, the story of heroism, of saving the mayor's own father. It was too much to absorb, too stark a contrast to the dismissive way they had all just witnessed Arthur being treated. Arthur himself seemed almost embarrassed by the sudden attention, his gaze dropping to his worn shoes for a moment before he met the mayor's eyes with a look of quiet acceptance. Mayor Thompson, his composure regained, but his voice, still thick with emotion, raised his hands for silence, though the square was already deathly quiet. "This morning," he announced, his voice carrying clearly to every corner, "we were preparing to celebrate our town's founders. But we have a founder of a different kind among us, a man whose courage and sacrifice helped preserve the very freedoms that allow us to gather here today." He paused, looking directly at Arthur, a profound respect etched on his face. "In honor of Sergeant Arthur Jenkins, for his extraordinary service, his quiet dignity in the face of ignorance, and for all the men and women like him who have given so much and asked for so little, I am officially declaring an immediate moment of silence. Let us reflect on true heroism and the debt we owe." As he spoke, the mayor himself straightened, his posture subtly shifting to one of military bearing. Slowly, across the square, people began to lower their heads. The only sound was the gentle rustle of leaves in the old oak trees. Arthur Jenkins stood a little taller. A single tear finally escaped, tracing a path down his weathered cheek. A silent testament to a pain acknowledged, a dignity restored. The silence that fell over Harmony Creek's town square was profound, deeper than any mere absence of noise. It was a silence filled with reflection, with shame, with a dawning understanding. For a full minute, perhaps longer, the only movement was the slight breeze stirring the banners and the flags. Chad stood frozen, his face a mask of mortification, the bright polo shirt now seeming garish and inappropriate. The woman with the designer handbag had tears welling in her eyes. Others shuffled uncomfortably, the weight of their earlier judgment pressing down. When the mayor finally quietly said, "Thank you," the spell was broken, but the atmosphere remained irrevocably changed. People looked at Arthur Jenkins differently now. They saw not an old, shabby man, but a pillar of quiet strength. A hero who had walked among them unrecognized. Chad, his voice barely a whisper, finally managed to approach Arthur. "Sir, Mr. Jenkins." "Sergeant, I am so sorry. I had no idea. I was wrong, terribly wrong." Arthur looked at the young man, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then a hint of forgiveness softened his eyes. "We all make mistakes, son," he said, his voice gentle. "Learn from them." He didn't offer a handshake, nor did he need to. The lesson had been seared into Chad's consciousness. The mayor put a supportive hand on Arthur's shoulder. "Arthur, will you join me on the platform today as my guest of honor?" Arthur hesitated, then gave a slow nod. The planned Founders' Day speeches took on a new, deeper meaning that day. The story of Sergeant Jenkins's quiet dignity and the town's moment of reckoning spread like wildfire. In the following weeks, things changed in small but significant ways. The town council fast-tracked a proposal for better veteran support services. The local newspaper ran a feature story on Arthur, not sensationalizing his heroism, but highlighting his quiet life and the importance of remembering People in town started to greet Arthur by name, with nods of respect, a quiet word of thanks. The memorial in the square became a more visited, more cherished spot, the greatest. Change, perhaps, was in the way people saw each other, a little less quick to judge by appearance, a little more open to the stories hidden beneath the surface. Arthur continued his morning walks, his visits to the memorial, but he was no longer invisible. He was Sergeant Jenkins, a hero who had finally, in his own quiet way, come home to a town that now truly saw him. The moral of this story: respect is not earned by the clothes one wears or the station one holds in the present, but by the content of one's character and the sum of one's actions. True worth is often hidden, and we must never judge a book by its cover. For heroes walk among us every day, often in the quietest of guises. Subscribe to Hidden Sparks for more stories that honor true heroes and remind us of the enduring power of the human spirit. Type honor in the comments if this story of vindication and respect touched your heart.